The Boeing 737 was 37,000 feet above the Nevada desert when the first F-22 Raptor appeared off the starboard wing. Cassandra Mitchell barely looked up from her crossword puzzle, even as the other passengers pressed their faces against the windows, phones out, recording what they assumed was just another military escort. She'd seen fighter jets before. What she hadn't expected was for the lead pilot to request her call sign over the aircraft's intercom system. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cassandra had specifically chosen seat 12F for 3 reasons. It was over the wing, where turbulence felt less pronounced. It was far enough from the bathrooms to avoid foot traffic, and most importantly, it offered her a clear view of the sky without having to crane her neck around other passengers. At 52, she'd learned to appreciate the small comforts that made cross-country flights bearable. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Her alarm went off in her modest apartment in Tucson, Arizona. She'd packed light, just a carry-on, with enough clothes for 3 days in Virginia. The purpose of her trip was simple enough: a job interview with a defense contractor outside Richmond. After 18 months of unemployment, following the closure of the aerospace firm, where she'd worked as a systems analyst, Cassandra needed this opportunity. She'd dressed conservatively for travel: dark slacks, a navy blazer, and comfortable flats that wouldn't set off metal detectors. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore minimal makeup. To any casual observer, boarding Flight 1847, she looked like countless other middle-aged business travelers making their way from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. What the other passengers couldn't see was the small titanium plate in her left shoulder, a souvenir from a training accident 15 years earlier. They couldn't see the faint scar along her hairline, where shrapnel had grazed her during a mission over the Balkans. And they certainly couldn't see the muscle memory that made her automatically note the exits, assess potential threats, and catalog the faces of everyone within 3 rows of her seat. Cassandra had perfected the art of invisibility. In airports, she was just another traveler struggling with oversized luggage and long security lines. On planes, she was the quiet woman who never reclined her seat too far, never hogged the armrest, and never complained about crying babies or chattering teenagers. She'd learned that being forgettable was a survival skill, one that had served her well in her previous career and continued to benefit her in civilian life. The flight from Phoenix had been smooth so far. They'd pushed back from the gate late due to air traffic control delays, but the pilot had made up time during climb-out. Cassandra had settled into her routine buckle, the seatbelt low and tight, adjust the air vent to minimize drafts, and pull out her book of crossword puzzles. She found the mental exercise soothing, a way to keep her mind occupied without engaging with the world around her. Halfway through a particularly challenging puzzle about astronomical terms, she became aware of increased chatter from the passengers around her. A teenager in 11E was excitedly pointing out the window, and an elderly man across the aisle was trying to get his wife's attention. Cassandra glanced up, more curious about the disturbance than genuinely interested in whatever had caught their attention. That's when she saw the F-22. The aircraft was flying roughly 500 feet off their starboard wing, maintaining perfect formation with the commercial airliner. Its angular stealth design was unmistakable gray and menacing against the brilliant blue sky. Even from this distance, Cassandra could make out the pilot's helmet through the canopy, and she found herself automatically assessing the aircraft's configuration and flight characteristics. The F-22 was flying clean with no external ordnance visible, which meant this was likely a training mission or a routine intercept. The pilot's formation flying was textbook perfect, maintaining precise distance and altitude relative to the Boeing 737. Cassandra had to admit, It was impressive flying, especially considering the significant difference in aircraft performance capabilities. Other passengers were now standing in the aisles, trying to get better views and taking photos. The flight attendants were politely asking everyone to return to their seats, but their own excitement was evident. It wasn't every day that a civilian flight received a military escort, and the crew seemed as curious as the passengers about the reason for the F-22's presence. Cassandra returned to her crossword puzzle, though she found herself periodically glancing out the window. A second F-22 had joined the formation on the port side, and both aircraft were maintaining station with the airliner. The precision of their flying was remarkable, and despite herself, she felt a flutter of the old excitement she used to experience when working closely with military aircraft. The puzzle she was working on had a clue that made her smile: military aircraft designation, 7 letters. The answer was obvious: fighter. She filled in the letters with her blue pen, the same type of government-issue BIC pen she'd carried for 23 years of active duty. A flight attendant named Jennifer was making her way down the aisle, reassuring passengers that the military escort was routine and nothing to worry about. When she reached Cassandra's row, she paused and leaned down slightly. "Pretty exciting, isn't it?" Jennifer said, gesturing toward the window. "I've been flying for 12 years and never seen anything like this." Cassandra looked up from her puzzle and nodded politely. "They're good pilots," she said simply, then returned to her crossword. Jennifer seemed to expect more of a reaction, but when none came, she continued down the aisle to comfort a nervous passenger who was convinced the fighter jets meant trouble. Cassandra had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was the minimal response. Getting excited about military aircraft would only invite questions she preferred not to answer. The truth was, seeing the F-22s brought back memories she'd spent years trying to compartmentalize. She remembered the first time she'd seen a Raptor up close at Nellis Air Force Base back when the program was still classified, and she was one of only a handful of people cleared to work on its flight test data. The aircraft had represented the absolute cutting edge of aviation technology, and being involved in its development had been the highlight of her career. That was before everything changed, before the incident that ended her flying status, before the medical retirement, before the transition to civilian life that had been more difficult than she'd ever anticipated. The F-22 program had continued, without her eventually becoming operational and taking its place as the world's most advanced air superiority fighter. Now, 15 years later, she was watching 2 of them escort her commercial flight, and she found the irony both bitter and amusing. She'd helped design some of the systems that made such precise formation flying possible. Yet she was observing from the passenger cabin of a Boeing 737, traveling to a job interview that would pay a fraction of what she'd earned as a test pilot. The captain's voice came over the intercom, interrupting her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, you've probably noticed we have some military aircraft accompanying us today. This is a routine training exercise, and there's absolutely nothing to be concerned about. We expect them to depart our formation shortly, and will continue on to Washington, D.C., as scheduled." Cassandra glanced out the window again. The F-22s showed no signs of departing. If anything, they seemed to be settling in for a longer escort. The lead aircraft had moved slightly closer, and she could now clearly see the pilot's helmet and oxygen mask. Something about the formation and the aircraft positioning suggested this wasn't entirely routine, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what felt different. A businessman in seat 12D was on his phone, apparently trying to call someone to report the military escort. His conversation was loud enough that Cassandra couldn't help but overhear fragments. "2 fighter jets. Don't know why. Looks like something from Top Gun." She suppressed the urge to correct him. The F-22 was nothing like the F-14 Tomcats featured in that movie. It was a generation ahead in technology capability and sophistication. The Raptor could do things that earlier fighters could only dream of, and its pilots were trained to a standard that exceeded anything from previous eras of aviation. The crossword puzzle had another aviation-related clue: high-altitude military reconnaissance abbreviation. The answer was SR-71, but there were only 5 spaces. She tried different variations before realizing the answer was simply Intel, for intelligence gathering. It reminded her of her own background in flight testing, where intelligence about aircraft performance was gathered on every single mission. The F-22s had been with them for some time now and showed no signs of leaving. The initial excitement among the passengers had settled into a kind of resigned curiosity. People were still taking photos, but the novelty was wearing off. Cassandra had returned to her crossword puzzle, though she found herself unable to focus completely on the clues. Something was happening that went beyond a simple training exercise or routine intercept. The F-22s were maintaining perfect formation, but their presence felt more purposeful than coincidental. She'd spent enough time around military aviation to recognize when something was different, even if she couldn't identify exactly what. The flight attendant, named Jennifer, was making another pass through the cabin, checking on passengers and answering questions about the military escort. When she reached Cassandra's row again, she paused and glanced out the window. "They're still there," Jennifer observed. "Usually military aircraft don't stay with civilian flights this long." Cassandra looked up from her puzzle and met the flight attendant's eyes. For a moment, she considered sharing some of her knowledge about military procedures and aircraft capabilities. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "I'm sure they have their reasons." There was something in Cassandra's tone that made Jennifer look at her more carefully. The calm way she'd responded to the fighter escort, her lack of excitement or concern, and now her matter-of-fact acknowledgement that the military had reasons for their actions. It suggested a familiarity with such situations that most civilian passengers wouldn't possess. But before Jennifer could ask any follow-up questions, the captain's voice returned to the intercom system with an announcement that would change everything about this routine flight from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds from the flight deck." The captain's voice carried a different tone, now more formal, almost cautious. "We've received a rather unusual request from the military aircraft accompanying us. They're asking to speak with a passenger in seat 12F. If that's you, please press your call button, and a flight attendant will assist you." The entire cabin went silent. Even the crying baby in row 8 seemed to pause, mid-wail. Cassandra felt every pair of eyes in her section turn toward her, including Jennifer's wide-eyed stare from the aisle. Her finger hovered over the call button, while her mind raced through possibilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. This wasn't protocol. Military aircraft didn't make social calls to commercial passengers. Someone had run her name through a database, probably triggered by the passenger manifest, cross-referenced against military records. But why now? Why, after 15 years of successfully flying under the radar? She pressed the button. Jennifer appeared beside her seat so quickly that she must have been waiting. "Ma'am, Captain Reynolds would like you to come forward to the flight deck if you don't mind." "Of course," Cassandra said, closing her crossword book and standing. The businessman in 12D was openly gawking, now his phone forgotten in his hand. The teenager in 11E had stopped recording and was watching with the kind of intense curiosity that only adolescents could manage. The walk to the front of the aircraft felt longer than usual. Passengers craned their necks as she passed, whispers following in her wake. She caught fragments. What do they want? She doesn't look so ordinary. Maybe she's in trouble. The cockpit door was already open when she reached the galley. Captain Reynolds, a graying man in his late 50s, gestured for her to enter. His co-pilot, a younger woman with sharp eyes, was monitoring the radio communications while maintaining their heading. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Reynolds. This is First Officer Martinez. I have to tell you, in 32 years of flying, I've never had a request like this." He gestured toward the radio panel. "The flight leader out there wants to speak with you directly. Says he has authorization to patch through a secure channel." Cassandra looked out the cockpit windows. The F-22s were still in perfect formation, close enough now that she could read the tail numbers. The lead aircraft bore the distinctive markings of the 1st Fighter Wing from Langley Air Force Base. That detail sent a chill down her spine. Langley was home to the 27th Fighter Squadron, the unit she'd worked with during the F-22's initial operational testing. "Did they give you any indication what this is about?" she asked. "Negative. They ran your name through some kind of verification system and came back with instructions to facilitate direct communication. The request came with proper authorization codes, so we're cooperating." Reynolds paused, studying her face. "Ma'am, are you military?" "Was," Cassandra said simply. "A long time ago." First Officer Martinez looked up from her instruments. "The lead pilot's call sign is Viper. He's requesting immediate contact on frequency 243.0. That's a military emergency channel." Cassandra felt her stomach drop. She knew that call sign. Major David Chun had been a young captain when she'd last worked with him, fresh out of test pilot school and eager to push every envelope the F-22 had to offer. If he was flying lead on this intercept, it meant someone at Langley had specifically requested him for this mission. "I'll take the call," she said. Captain Reynolds handed her a headset and showed her which button to press for transmission. The secure channel crackled to life with the familiar static of military communications. "Phoenix Flight 1947. This is Viper 1 requesting to speak with passenger Mitchell Seat 12 F authentication. Sierra 7 Charlie 9 Euro, how do you copy?" Cassandra recognized the voice immediately, though it had deepened with maturity and carried the confidence that came with years of flying the world's most advanced fighter. She pressed the transmit button. "Viper 1, this is passenger Mitchell. I copy you 5x5. There was a pause on the channel, longer than normal radio protocol would dictate. When Chun's voice returned, it carried a note of something between surprise and respect. "Ma'am, I need to verify your identity for security purposes. Can you confirm your previous call sign and your last duty assignment?" The cockpit crew was listening intently, though they were trying to appear busy with their instruments. Cassandra realized that whatever she said next would fundamentally change how these people saw her, and probably how the entire passenger manifest would view her once word spread through the cabin. She'd spent 15 years being invisible, just another middle-aged woman struggling to find her place in civilian life. The anonymity had been protective, allowing her to heal from wounds both physical and psychological, without the weight of expectations or the burden of explaining her past. But standing in this cockpit with 2 F-22 Raptors off their wingtips and a voice from her former life asking for verification, she realized that invisibility had been an illusion. The military never really forgets its own, especially those who've earned certain distinctions. "Viper 1, my call sign was Ghost. Last assignment was Edwards Air Force Base, Air Force Flight Test Center. I was project officer for the F-22 Avionics Integration Program." The silence on the channel stretched for nearly 10 seconds. In the cockpit, both Captain Reynolds and First Officer Martinez had stopped pretending to focus on their duties and were staring at her with undisguised amazement. When Chun's voice returned, it carried a tone she remembered from their working relationship, professional respect, mixed with genuine warmth. "Ghost, it's an honor to fly escort for you today. We have a situation that requires your immediate consultation. Are you able to accept a priority divert to Nellis Air Force Base?" Cassandra's mind raced. A priority divert to Nellis meant something serious was happening, serious enough to redirect a commercial flight and involve a civilian consultant. Nellis was home to the Air Force's most advanced testing and evaluation programs, including ongoing F-22 development work. "Viper, I'm a civilian now. I don't have any current clearances or authorizations." "Ma'am, your clearances were reactivated under emergency provisions. We have a code black situation involving F-22 avionics systems. You're the only person outside of active duty personnel with the specific knowledge we need." Code black. Cassandra felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with critical situations. In Air Force terminology, code black meant a potentially catastrophic system failure that could affect operational readiness or flight safety. If they were reactivating her clearances and diverting a commercial flight, the situation was worse than serious. Captain Reynolds leaned forward. "Ma'am, what exactly is happening here?" Before Cassandra could answer, First Officer Martinez interrupted. "Captain, we're receiving a priority message from air traffic control. We're being directed to divert to McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. Military escort will continue." Cassandra looked out at the F-22s, noting subtle changes in their formation. They'd moved slightly closer and adjusted their positioning to provide a more protective escort pattern. Whatever was happening at Nellis, it was significant enough to warrant extraordinary measures. "Ghost, we need your answer." Chun's voice pressed through the headset. "Time is critical." She thought about her job interview in Virginia, about the defense contractor position that represented her best hope for financial stability. She thought about the quiet life she'd built in Tucson, the anonymity that had allowed her to heal and move forward. All of that would have to wait. Viper 1. I accept the divert. What's my transportation to Nellis once we land at McCarran? We'll have a helicopter waiting, Ghost. And ma'am, it's good to have you back in the fight. Captain Reynolds was already coordinating with air traffic control for the course change to Las Vegas. First Officer Martinez was running through checklists and calculating fuel requirements for the divert. The professional efficiency of the cockpit crew reminded Cassandra of the military precision she'd once lived and breathed. She handed the headset back to Captain Reynolds and prepared to return to her seat. The captain stopped her with a question she'd been expecting. "Ma'am, I have to ask, what exactly did you do in the Air Force?" Cassandra paused at the cockpit door, considering how much to reveal. The truth was classified even after all these years. But some details were public record, and the crew deserved to understand why their routine flight had been transformed into a military operation. "I was a test pilot, Captain. I helped develop and integrate the systems that make those F-22s possible. It looks like they need that expertise again." As she walked back through the cabin, the passenger reactions were even more intense than before. Word had clearly spread that the military was specifically interested in the quiet woman in seat 12F. The businessman in 12D actually stood up as she passed, as if he thought he should salute, or something equally awkward. Jennifer was waiting by her seat, with barely contained curiosity. "Is everything all right? The passengers are asking questions I can't answer." "We're diverting to Las Vegas," Cassandra said, settling back into 12F. "Military business. Nothing dangerous, just important." She reopened her crossword book, though she knew concentration would be impossible now. Her mind was already shifting back into the analytical mode she'd used during her test pilot days, considering what kind of avionics problem would be serious enough to justify this level of response. The F-22 systems were incredibly complex, with multiple redundancies and fail-safes built into every critical component. For something to constitute a code black situation, it would have to be either a fundamental design flaw that had gone undetected, a software problem that affected multiple aircraft, or some kind of external threat that compromised the airplane's defensive systems. Any of those possibilities was deeply concerning. The F-22 was America's primary air superiority fighter, the aircraft relied upon to maintain air dominance against any potential adversary. If there was a systemic problem with the fleet, it could compromise national security on a scale that few people could fully comprehend. The teenager in 11E had worked up the courage to turn around and address her directly. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you really a test pilot?" "I was," Cassandra said, looking up from her puzzle. "A long time ago." "That's so cool. Did you fly fighter jets?" "Among other things." The boy's eyes widened with excitement, but before he could ask another question, his mother pulled him back around and whispered something about not bothering the nice lady. Cassandra almost smiled at that. If the woman only knew what the nice lady had accomplished during her military career, she might have been more encouraging of her son's curiosity. Outside the window, the Nevada landscape was beginning to appear below them. The F-22s had adjusted their formation slightly for the approach into Las Vegas airspace, and she could see the pilots coordinating their descent with the airliner. The precision of their flying remained flawless, a testament to the training and skill that went into creating F-22 pilots. Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance for our approach into McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. We apologize for the change in destination, but this diversion was necessary due to circumstances beyond our control. We'll have information about continuing service to Washington, D.C. once we're on the ground." As the aircraft began its descent, Cassandra found herself mentally preparing for whatever awaited her at Nellis. It had been 15 years since she'd been involved in high-level military operations, but some skills never truly faded. The analytical thinking, the ability to synthesize complex technical information under pressure, the calm focus required for critical decision-making, those were as much a part of her as breathing. She just hoped they would be enough for whatever crisis had brought her back into the world she'd left behind. The helicopter that met Cassandra at McCarran International Airport was a UH-60 Blackhawk with minimal markings, the kind used for transporting personnel who preferred not to advertise their movements. Two airmen in dress blues were waiting beside the aircraft, their bearings suggesting this was far from a routine pickup. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Torres stepped forward as Cassandra approached her salute crisp, despite the desert wind whipping across the tarmac. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Torres. Colonel Patterson sends his compliments and requests your immediate transport to Nellis. We have a flight suit and equipment waiting on board if you need to change." Cassandra returned the salute, automatically muscle memory overriding 15 years of civilian life. "What's the current status of the situation, Sergeant?" "Ma'am, I'm not briefed on operational details. Colonel Patterson will provide a full briefing once we arrive at the test facility." The flight to Nellis took only a short time, covering terrain that Cassandra knew better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. The desert below was marked with the geometric patterns of test ranges, restricted airspace, that had seen decades of experimental aircraft pushing the boundaries of what was possible. As they approached the base, she could see increased activity on the flight line. More aircraft than normal were positioned in the alert hangars, and ground crews were moving with the kind of urgent efficiency that suggested elevated operational tempo. Whatever the code black situation involved, it was affecting multiple squadrons. The helicopter sat down at a restricted area near the flight test center, the same complex where Cassandra had spent some of the most challenging and rewarding years of her career. The buildings looked exactly as she remembered them, though new security measures were evident: additional barriers, more guard posts, and what appeared to be upgraded electronic surveillance systems. Colonel James Patterson was waiting beside a government sedan, and Cassandra felt a genuine smile cross her face for the first time in months. Jim had been a major when they'd worked together on the F-22 program, a brilliant engineer who understood both the technical complexities of modern aircraft and the practical realities of military operations. "Ghost, you look good," Patterson said, extending his hand. "Civilian life seems to agree with you." "Jim, good to see you, Maid Colonel, though I wish the circumstances were different." She gestured toward the increased activity around them. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we pulled you off a commercial flight. Let's get to the secure briefing room, and I'll show you what we're dealing with." The drive through the base revealed more signs of heightened alert status. Security checkpoints that had been routine were now thorough, and personnel movements seemed more restricted than normal. Cassandra noticed F-22s positioned in configurations that suggested immediate launch capability rather than routine maintenance cycles. The secure briefing room was in the basement of Building 1840, a facility that hadn't existed during her previous assignment. The room itself was a marvel of modern security technology: electromagnetic shielding, white noise generators, and biometric access controls that would prevent any unauthorized recording or transmission of classified information. 3 people were waiting inside a woman in an Air Force uniform, with Lieutenant Colonel insignia, a civilian in a conservative suit, who had the bearing of a senior intelligence analyst, and a young captain with the patch of the 27th Fighter Squadron Chun's unit. "Ghost, let me introduce the team," Patterson said, as they took seats around a polished conference table. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim is our current F-22 Systems Integration Officer. Dr. Marcus Webb is from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and Captain Lisa Morgan is our lead test pilot for the current upgrade program." Cassandra shook hands with each team member, noting the mix of respect and curiosity in their expressions. Her reputation had apparently preceded her, which could be either helpful or problematic, depending on expectations. "Before we begin," Dr. Webb said, "I need to verify your security clearance reactivation and have you sign some updated non-disclosure agreements. The information we're about to share is compartmentalized above top secret." The paperwork was familiar territory: endless forms with dire warnings about the consequences of unauthorized disclosure. Cassandra signed where indicated her security clearance codes from 15 years ago, apparently still valid in the government's labyrinthine database systems. "Now then," Patterson said, activating a large display screen at the front of the room. "We began receiving anomalous data from F-22s, conducting routine training missions. The aircraft were experiencing intermittent failures in their integrated avionics systems, specifically the sensor fusion network that combines radar, infrared, and electronic warfare data." The screen showed a series of technical diagrams that Cassandra recognized immediately. The F-22's avionics architecture was something she'd helped design, a revolutionary approach to information processing that gave the aircraft unprecedented situational awareness. The failures followed a pattern. Lieutenant Colonel Kim continued taking over the briefing. They occurred during specific flight profiles, always when the aircraft were operating above 35,000 feet and conducting active electronic surveillance. "Initially, we thought it was a software glitch in the latest upgrade package." Captain Morgan leaned forward. "That's when things got interesting. We grounded the affected aircraft and ran complete diagnostics. The software was clean hardware checked out normal, but we kept getting these phantom signals in the avionics logs. Cassandra studied the data displays, her mind automatically analyzing the technical information. Show me the signal characteristics. Dr. Webb touched a control, and the screen filled with complex waveform patterns. This is where your expertise becomes critical, Ghost. These signals don't match any known electronic warfare or communication systems. They appear to be targeting the specific frequencies used by the F-22 sensor fusion network. The implications hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Someone was actively jamming or attempting to compromise the F-22's most critical systems. This wasn't a mechanical failure or software bug. It was electronic warfare, directed specifically at America's most advanced fighter aircraft. "How many aircraft have been affected?" she asked. 17 so far across 3 different squadrons, Patterson replied, all along the eastern seaboard from Florida to Maine. The pattern suggests systematic probing of our defensive capabilities. Cassandra stood and moved closer to the display screen, examining the technical data with the focused intensity that had made her reputation as a test pilot. The signal characteristics were sophisticated, showing intimate knowledge of the F-22's electronic architecture that should have been impossible for foreign intelligence services to obtain. "This isn't random jamming," she said finally. "Whoever is doing this understands our systems better than they should. They're not trying to bring down aircraft. They're mapping our capabilities and looking for vulnerabilities." Captain Morgan nodded grimly. "That's our assessment too, but it gets worse. We intercepted communications suggesting that similar probing is being conducted against other advanced military systems. The F-35 program has reported anomalous readings, and there are unconfirmed reports of issues with some of our satellite networks. We need your insight on potential countermeasures," Lieutenant Colonel Kim said. "You understand the F-22 system's architecture better than anyone outside of the original design team. Most of those people have retired or moved to other programs." Cassandra returned to her seat, her mind racing through possibilities. The F-22's avionics were protected by multiple layers of encryption and frequency-hopping protocols that should have made them virtually impossible to target effectively. For someone to be achieving this level of interference, they would need either extraordinary technical capabilities or inside information about the aircraft's defensive systems. "I need to see the complete technical specifications for the current avionics package," she said, "and I want to review any modifications or upgrades that have been implemented since my departure." Dr. Webb exchanged glances with Colonel Patterson. "That's classified under multiple special access programs. We can provide limited information, but complete specifications would require additional authorization." "Then get the authorization," Cassandra said sharply. "If you want my help solving this problem, I need to understand exactly what we're defending against. Half measures and compartmentalized information won't cut it when we're dealing with this level of sophistication." Patterson nodded. "I'll make the calls. In the meantime, we have a test flight scheduled for tomorrow morning. We're going to deliberately trigger the interference and see if we can gather more detailed intelligence about the source." "Who's flying the test?" Cassandra asked. "I am," Captain Morgan replied. "We've installed additional monitoring equipment to capture data during the interference events." Cassandra felt the familiar stirring of professional concern that came with dangerous test flights. "What's your backup plan if the interference is more severe than expected? If they can disrupt sensor fusion, they might be able to affect other critical systems." "We'll have chase aircraft monitoring, and the test will be conducted over restricted airspace with emergency recovery procedures in place," Patterson assured her. "That's not enough," Cassandra said firmly. "If this is electronic warfare, then it's potentially an act of aggression against the United States. Sending up a single aircraft to poke at an unknown capability is asking for trouble. You need a more comprehensive approach." The room fell silent as the team absorbed her assessment. Dr. Webb was the first to speak. "What do you recommend?" Cassandra moved to the whiteboard at the side of the room and began sketching a diagram. "We need a layered approach, multiple aircraft at different altitudes, comprehensive electronic monitoring from ground stations, and real-time analysis capabilities. Most importantly, we need to determine if this is a foreign adversary or if we're dealing with compromised systems." "Compromised how?" Lieutenant Colonel Kim asked. "Someone with this level of knowledge about our systems either developed extraordinary intelligence capabilities very quickly, or they have access to information that should be restricted to American personnel. Given the sophistication of what we're seeing, I'm betting on the latter." The implications of what she was suggesting hung heavy in the air. If the F-22 program had been compromised from within, it represented a security breach of unprecedented proportions. The aircraft was America's primary tool for maintaining air superiority, and any vulnerability could shift the global balance of power. Patterson stood and began pacing, a habit Cassandra remembered from their previous work together. "If you're right about internal compromise, then we're looking at a much larger problem than electronic warfare. We're talking about espionage at the highest levels of the defense establishment." Which explains why my clearances were reactivated so quickly, Cassandra realized. Someone very senior wanted an outside perspective, someone who wasn't part of current programs and couldn't be compromised by ongoing operations. Captain Morgan looked up from the technical displays she'd been studying. "Ghost, there's something else you should know. The aircraft experiencing these problems aren't random selections. They're all from squadrons that have been involved in recent exercises with allied nations, or stationed at bases with significant international cooperation programs." That detail added another layer to the puzzle. International cooperation programs meant foreign military personnel with varying levels of access to American systems and procedures. The potential for intelligence compromise multiplied exponentially when multiple nations were involved. "I need a complete list of all foreign nationals who have had access to F-22 operations in the past 18 months, Cassandra said. "And I want to review the protocols for information sharing and joint exercises." Dr. Webb was taking notes on a secure tablet. "That's going to be a substantial list. The F-22 has been involved in NATO exercises, Pacific Partnership programs, and bilateral training with several allied nations." "Then we'd better get started," Cassandra replied. "Because if someone is systematically mapping the capabilities of our most advanced fighter aircraft, we need to understand their methods before they move from intelligence gathering to active interference with operations." As the briefing concluded, Cassandra found herself fully engaged in the kind of high-stakes problem-solving that had defined her military career. The quiet life in Tucson seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the familiar urgency of protecting national security through technical expertise and analytical thinking. Tomorrow's test flight would provide more data, but she already suspected that the Code Black situation was just the beginning of a much larger challenge. The secure computer terminal in Building 1840's basement was a far cry from the systems Cassandra had used during her active duty years. The processing power available now was extraordinary, capable of analyzing massive data sets in real time and correlating information across multiple classified databases simultaneously. She was deep into her analysis of the foreign personnel access logs, cross-referencing names against intelligence databases and looking for patterns that might explain how someone had gained such detailed knowledge of F-22 systems. The coffee beside her had gone cold, replaced by increasingly stronger versions as the night wore on. Dr. Webb had provided her with a secure workspace and unlimited access to relevant files though she suspected he was monitoring her activities through the computer's logging systems. That was standard protocol for reactivated personnel, and she had no objections to oversight, given the sensitivity of the information she was reviewing. The foreign access list was indeed substantial. Over the past 18 months, personnel from 12 different nations had participated in various levels of F-22 operations. Most were pilots or technical specialists from Allied air forces cleared through extensive background investigations and limited to specific aspects of aircraft capabilities. What troubled Cassandra was the sophistication required to execute the electronic interference they were seeing. This wasn't the work of a single individual gathering information during a joint exercise. The signal characteristics suggested access to highly classified technical specifications that should have been compartmentalized beyond the reach of foreign personnel. A soft knock on the security door interrupted her concentration. Captain Morgan entered, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and looking like she'd been awake as long as Cassandra had. "Any luck with the personnel records?" Morgan asked, settling into a chair across from the workstation. "Too much luck," Cassandra replied, gesturing at the displays. "I've identified 47 individuals with varying levels of access to F-22 systems, representing 11 different nations. Any one of them could have gathered pieces of information that, when combined, might provide the knowledge base we're seeing. But you don't think it's that simple?" "No, I don't. The interference patterns are too precise, too targeted. Whoever is doing this understands not just the general architecture of our avionics, but the specific implementation details that would take years of direct involvement to acquire." Morgan leaned forward, studying the data on the screens. "What if it's not foreign intelligence at all? What if we're looking at this from the wrong angle?" Cassandra had been considering the same possibility. Domestic compromise. Someone with legitimate access using their position to gather intelligence for hostile purposes. It would explain the level of detailed knowledge. Morgan agreed. And it would be much harder to detect through normal counterintelligence measures. The implications were sobering. If someone within the American defense establishment was systematically compromising F-22 capabilities, they would have access to information far beyond what any foreign intelligence service could reasonably obtain. They would also be positioned to continue gathering intelligence and potentially sabotage countermeasures. "I need to expand the search parameters," Cassandra said, turning back to the computer terminal. "Instead of looking at foreign personnel, I want to examine American citizens with access to F-22 programs who have had unusual financial activity, foreign contacts, or behavioral changes flagged by security reviews." "That's going to be a much larger data set," Morgan warned, "and it's going to raise flags with security personnel if you start pulling extensive files on American defense contractors and military personnel. Then we'll deal with those flags when they come up. Right now, we need to understand what we're facing before tomorrow's test flight puts you at risk unnecessarily." Morgan appreciated the concern, but pressed the issue. Ghost. "I've been thinking about the test flight profile. If we're really dealing with sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, going up there might be exactly what they want us to do. We could be providing them with an opportunity to test offensive capabilities against our aircraft." Cassandra paused her database search and turned to face the younger pilot directly. "What's your assessment of the risk level?" "Higher than Colonel Patterson is acknowledging. The interference pattern suggests someone is probing for vulnerabilities systematically. If they've moved from passive intelligence gathering to active testing, then tomorrow's flight could trigger a more aggressive response." It was a valid concern. Electronic warfare could escalate quickly from jamming to more destructive interference with critical flight systems. If hostile actors were confident enough in their capabilities to risk active engagement with an American fighter aircraft. The situation was already beyond intelligence gathering. "What alternative do you propose?" Cassandra asked. "Ground-based testing first. We can simulate the flight conditions that trigger the interference and see if we can replicate the effects in a controlled environment. If we can understand the mechanism without putting aircraft at risk, we'll be in a better position to develop countermeasures." Cassandra nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. How quickly can we set up a proper simulation?" "The equipment is already available in the avionics test lab. We could have a comprehensive ground test running within a few hours if Colonel Patterson approves the approach." "Let's make that recommendation. But first, I want to finish this database analysis. Something's bothering me about the timing of these interference events." Morgan left to coordinate with the test lab personnel, while Cassandra returned to her analysis. The expanded search parameters were yielding interesting results. Several American personnel with F-22 access had been flagged for unusual activities in the past year, though most appeared to be routine security concerns rather than indicators of espionage. One name caught her attention: Dr. Richard Blackwood, a senior systems engineer with Lockheed Martin, who had worked on F-22 avionics upgrades for nearly 2 decades. His security file showed recent financial irregularities, large cash deposits that didn't correlate with his known income sources, and traveled to countries that raised counterintelligence concerns. More troubling was his access level. Blackwood had been involved in every major F-22 system upgrade since the aircraft became operational. He understood the architecture better than almost anyone, and his current position gave him access to real-time operational data from active squadrons. Cassandra pulled up Blackwood's complete file, noting that he'd taken vacation time that coincided with several of the interference events. The correlation wasn't definitive, but it was suspicious enough to warrant further investigation. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Colonel Patterson. "Ghost, we've got a development. Cheyenne Mountain just reported anomalous signals targeting their satellite communication systems. The interference patterns match what we're seeing with the F-22 program. The timing correlates with your database access. Someone knows we're investigating and they're expanding their target set." The escalation was exactly what Cassandra had feared. If hostile actors were monitoring American military networks closely enough to detect investigative activities, they possessed capabilities that went far beyond simple electronic warfare. They were operating inside American defense systems with near real-time awareness of countermeasures. "Jim, we need to assume our communications are compromised. Switch to alternative protocols and consider this investigation a possible target of active surveillance." "Understood. I'm implementing OPSEC Level Alpha immediately. Can you be ready for a face-to-face briefing soon?" "Affirmative. And Jim, cancel tomorrow's test flight. We're dealing with something much more sophisticated than we initially assessed." After ending the call, Cassandra quickly compiled her database findings into a secure report, flagging Dr. Blackwood's activities for immediate counterintelligence review. The timing of the satellite interference suggested that their investigation had triggered a response, which meant they were getting close to something significant. The elevator ride to the upper levels of Building 1840 gave her time to consider the broader implications of what they were discovering. If American defense networks were compromised to this extent, the national security ramifications extended far beyond the F-22 program. Critical military communications intelligence systems and operational planning could all be at risk. Colonel Patterson was waiting in his office with Lieutenant Colonel Kim and Dr. Webb, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the developing situation. A secure communication terminal was active on Patterson's desk, indicating they were in contact with higher command levels. "The Joint Chiefs have been briefed," Patterson said without preamble. This is now classified as a potential national security emergency. We have authorization to implement whatever measures are necessary to identify and neutralize the threat. Dr. Webb opened a classified folder. We've also received intelligence indicating that similar interference patterns have been detected by allied nations operating American-supplied equipment. The scope of this operation is international, which supports the theory of internal compromise. Cassandra took a seat at the conference table. Someone with access to our most sensitive systems is providing intelligence to hostile actors who are using it to map Western military capabilities on a global scale. Lieutenant Colonel Kim activated a secure display showing a world map with highlighted incidents. The pattern is clear when you look at it globally. Every major NATO member has reported anomalous electronic activity targeting their most advanced military systems. The coordination required suggests a sophisticated intelligence operation. Cassandra studied the global pattern, noting the timing and geographic distribution of incidents. This isn't random probing. Someone is systematically mapping the electronic signatures and defensive capabilities of Western military forces. The question is whether this is preparation for future conflict, or if we're already in the early stages of electronic warfare. There's another possibility, Dr. Webb said quietly. Industrial espionage on a massive scale. If someone can map our military capabilities this thoroughly, they can also steal the technological advantages that have kept America ahead of potential adversaries. The economic implications were staggering. Decades of research and development, billions of dollars in advanced technology, and America's strategic military advantages could all be compromised if the intelligence gathering was comprehensive enough. Patterson's secure phone rang, and he answered with the formal tone reserved for communications with senior leadership. The conversation was brief, consisting mostly of acknowledgments and confirmations. When he hung up, his expression was grim. We've been ordered to implement immediate operational security measures across all affected programs. Additionally, the FBI is initiating a coordinated counterintelligence investigation targeting anyone with access to compromised systems, including Dr. Blackwood, Cassandra asked. Especially Dr. Blackwood. Your analysis flagged him as the highest probability suspect based on access opportunity and behavioral indicators. Federal agents are moving to place him under surveillance. Cassandra felt a mixture of satisfaction and concern. If Blackwood was involved in the intelligence compromise, identifying him quickly could limit further damage. But if he was being used as a scapegoat, or if the real threat came from elsewhere, they might be exposing their investigation, while the actual perpetrators remained free to continue their activities. We need to be prepared for the possibility that Blackwood is either innocent or just one part of a larger network, she cautioned. The sophistication we're seeing suggests coordinated activity involving multiple individuals with different types of access. Agreed, Patterson replied. That's why the investigation is being expanded to include a comprehensive review of all personnel with relevant access levels. In the meantime, we're implementing new security protocols and temporarily restricting access to the most sensitive technical specifications. As the briefing concluded, Cassandra realized that her quiet return to civilian life had been permanently interrupted. The skills and knowledge that had made her valuable to the F-22 program 15 years ago were now critical to protecting national security in ways she had never anticipated. The investigation was just beginning, but the stakes were already clear. America's most advanced military capabilities were under systematic attack, and failure to identify and neutralize the threat could shift the global balance of power in ways that would take decades to recover from. The FBI surveillance team lost Dr. Richard Blackwood somewhere between the Lockheed Martin facility in Palmdale and his residence in Lancaster, California. The news reached Nellis Air Force Base delivered by a secure phone call that sent ripples of alarm through the investigation team. Cassandra was in the avionics test lab when Colonel Patterson found her, his expression carrying the kind of controlled tension that experienced military officers developed when operations went sideways. She was working with Captain Morgan and a team of technicians to replicate the interference patterns using ground-based simulation equipment, a process that was yielding disturbing results. "We've got a problem," Patterson said without preamble. Blackwood knew he was being watched. He gave the FBI the slip using techniques that suggest professional training in surveillance detection. "Counter-surveillance training isn't part of the standard defense contractor skill set," Cassandra observed, pausing her analysis of the simulation data. "That supports the theory that he's working with hostile intelligence services." Captain Morgan looked up from the test equipment she was monitoring. How sophisticated was his evasion? Sophisticated enough that the FBI thinks he had help, multiple vehicle switches timing that suggests advanced planning and route selection that indicates detailed knowledge of surveillance blind spots in the Los Angeles area. The implications were clear. Blackwood's disappearance wasn't a panicked flight by someone who'd been caught. It was a planned extraction executed by professionals who understood American law enforcement and intelligence capabilities. That level of operational security suggested a well-established espionage network rather than a lone actor selling information. "What's the status of the simulation tests?" Patterson asked, moving to examine the displays showing the ground-based replication of the interference patterns. "Troubling," Cassandra replied. "We've been able to reproduce the electronic signatures exactly, which confirms that someone has incredibly detailed knowledge of our avionics architecture. But more concerning is what we discovered about the delivery method." She activated a display showing frequency analysis data. The interference isn't coming from traditional jamming equipment. The signals are being generated by modified commercial satellite communication systems, specifically targeting the frequency bands used by military avionics. "Satellite-based electronic warfare," Patterson said, understanding the implications immediately. "That explains the geographic range and the precision of the targeting." Captain Morgan pointed to additional data on her screens. "It gets worse. The satellite modifications required to generate these signals would cost millions of dollars and require technical expertise that very few organizations possess. We're not dealing with a typical intelligence operation. This is state-sponsored electronic warfare using commercial space assets." The revelation transformed their understanding of the threat. State-sponsored operations implied resources planning and objectives that went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. If a foreign government was systematically compromising American military capabilities using space-based assets, it represented a new form of warfare that existing defensive measures weren't designed to counter. Patterson's secure phone rang, and he answered with the crisp efficiency of someone expecting bad news. The conversation was brief but intense, consisting mostly of confirmations and acknowledgments. When he hung up, his expression was even grimmer. "The National Security Agency has detected similar satellite-based interference targeting British, French, and Australian military systems. This is a coordinated attack on the entire Western Alliance structure." Dr. Webb entered the laboratory at that moment carrying a folder marked with the highest classification levels. His usual composed demeanor showed cracks of stress that suggested he'd been dealing with crisis management at the highest levels of government. "We've received intelligence from multiple sources," Webb announced. Dr. Blackwood wasn't the only compromised individual. The counterintelligence investigation has identified at least 6 other defense contractors and military personnel with suspicious activities correlating to the electronic warfare timeline. A full network, Cassandra said. How long has this been operating? Based on the evidence we're uncovering, possibly 3 to 5 years. The sophistication and coordination suggest a long-term intelligence operation designed to map and compromise Western military capabilities systematically. Captain Morgan saved her simulation data and turned to face the group. If they've been gathering intelligence for that long, they know far more about our systems than just the F-22 avionics. They could have detailed knowledge of virtually every advanced military program in the alliance. The scope of the potential compromise was staggering. F-35 fighter jets, advanced missile defense systems, satellite networks, cyber warfare capabilities. All of it could be vulnerable if the intelligence operation had been as comprehensive as the evidence suggested. There's something else. Dr. Webb continued, opening his classified folder. The CIA has identified the likely sponsor of this operation. Signal intelligence and financial tracking point to a coordinated effort involving multiple hostile nations, but the primary orchestrator appears to be China's Ministry of State Security. The identification of China as the primary threat actor provided context for the scale and sophistication of the operation. China possessed the technological capabilities, financial resources, and strategic motivation to conduct electronic warfare on this scale. More concerning was their proven ability to coordinate with other nations hostile to Western interests. What's our response timeline? Patterson asked. Immediate, Webb replied. The President has been briefed, and we're implementing emergency defensive measures across all affected systems. Additionally, we're developing offensive countermeasures to neutralize the satellite-based interference capabilities. Cassandra felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with critical operations. What's my role in the countermeasures? You're being assigned to lead the technical analysis team, developing electronic warfare defenses specifically for the F-22 program, Patterson explained. Your knowledge of the original avionics architecture is critical for creating countermeasures that won't interfere with normal aircraft operations. I'll need access to the complete technical specifications for all current F-22 systems, she said, and I want to review any planned upgrades or modifications that might be affected by the countermeasures. Already arranged, Dr. Webb confirmed. You'll have unlimited access to all relevant technical data, plus a team of the best electronic warfare specialists available. Captain Morgan stepped forward. What about operational testing? We're going to need to verify that any countermeasures work effectively without compromising flight safety. That's where the test pilot experience becomes critical. Patterson sighed. We need someone who understands both the technical aspects of avionics and the practical requirements of fighter operations. Ghost, you're going to have to get back in the cockpit. The statement hung in the air for a moment, while Cassandra processed the implications. She hadn't flown a high-performance military aircraft in 15 years, and the F-22 had undergone significant upgrades since her last flight. The physical and mental demands of test flying were enormous, even for experienced pilots in peak condition. I'll need recurrent training and medical clearance, she said finally. My flight status was revoked after the accident. Medical clearance is already being expedited, Webb informed her. The flight surgeon will conduct a complete evaluation this afternoon. As for recurrent training, we have a compressed program designed for experienced pilots returning to F-22 operations. Cassandra felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The prospect of flying again, especially in the aircraft she'd helped develop, was appealing, despite the dangerous circumstances. But she also understood that her role would involve testing unproven countermeasures against sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, exactly the kind of high-risk test flying that had ended her career the first time. How much time do we have to develop and test the countermeasures? She asked. Less than we'd like, Patterson admitted. Intelligence suggests that the electronic warfare capabilities we're seeing are preparation for a larger operation. If we can't neutralize the threat quickly, we may face a situation where our most advanced military systems are effectively useless. The urgency was clear. Electronic warfare could disable American military capabilities without firing a shot, potentially shifting the global balance of power without the massive costs and risks of conventional conflict. If China and its allies could neutralize Western air superiority, missile defenses, and communication systems simultaneously, they could achieve strategic objectives without traditional acts of war. I'll start on the technical analysis immediately, Cassandra said. But I want to make one thing clear. Developing effective countermeasures against this level of sophistication is going to require taking significant risks. We'll be testing unproven systems against hostile capabilities that we don't fully understand. Understood, Webb replied. But the alternative is accepting that our most advanced military systems can be neutralized at will by hostile actors. That's not an acceptable strategic position. As the briefing concluded, Cassandra found herself mentally preparing for a return to the high-stakes world of experimental test flying. The quiet life in Tucson had been comfortable, but it hadn't provided the intellectual challenge and sense of purpose that came with critical national security work. The next phase of the investigation would require her to combine 15 years of civilian technical experience with her original expertise in F-22 systems, then put that knowledge to the test in actual flight operations. The stakes couldn't be higher. The effectiveness of American air power and the security of the entire Western alliance hung in the balance. What she didn't yet know was that Dr. Blackwood's disappearance was just the beginning of a much more complex operation designed to draw her specifically back into active testing. Someone wanted Ghost back in the cockpit, and the electronic warfare attacks were partially intended to ensure that she would be the one developing and testing the countermeasures. The game was more sophisticated than anyone at Nellis Air Force Base realized, and Cassandra was about to become both the hunter and the hunted in an electronic warfare operation that would determine the future of military aviation. The medical clearance involved tests that Cassandra hadn't endured since her original flight physical 2 decades earlier. Dr. Amanda Foster, the flight surgeon assigned to her case, was thorough to the point of obsession, understanding that clearing a pilot for high-risk test flying after 15 years of civilian life carried enormous responsibility. Your cardiovascular fitness is actually better than most active-duty pilots, Dr. Foster observed, reviewing the stress test results. Whatever you've been doing in civilian life has kept you in exceptional physical condition. Rock climbing and hiking, Cassandra replied, pulling on her flight suit for the first time in 15 years. The familiar weight of the survival gear and the precise fit of the equipment brought back muscle memories she'd thought were permanently buried. The psychological evaluation is more complex, Dr. Foster continued. You've been through significant trauma both from your accident and from the transition to civilian life. Are you confident that you can handle high-stress flight operations without triggering adverse reactions? It was a fair question. The accident that had ended her flying career had been more than a simple mechanical failure. It had been a complete avionics malfunction during a high-altitude test that had nearly killed her and had definitely killed her confidence in complex aircraft systems. Doctor, I helped design the systems I'm going to be testing. If anyone can handle the stress of proving that our countermeasures work, it's me. The confidence in her voice surprised even herself. Somewhere during the past few days, The analytical challenge of understanding the electronic warfare threat had reawakened the part of her personality that thrived on solving impossible technical problems under extreme pressure. Dr. Foster signed the medical clearance with obvious reluctance. "You're cleared for flight status, but I want daily medical monitoring during the test program. Any signs of physiological stress or psychological difficulty, and we ground you immediately." Cassandra was soon walking across the tarmac toward the most advanced F-22 Raptor ever built. The aircraft bore the tail number 91143 and carried modifications that represented 15 years of continuous improvement since her last flight. Every system had been upgraded, every capability enhanced, and most importantly for their current mission, every electronic warfare defense had been redesigned. Captain Morgan was conducting the pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that characterized all professional test pilots. "The countermeasures package is completely integrated," she explained as they walked around the aircraft. "We've installed new frequency hopping protocols, enhanced signal encryption, and adaptive jamming systems that should neutralize the satellite-based interference." "Should" being the operative term, Cassandra noted, examining the external modifications that housed the new electronic warfare equipment. "We won't know if it works until someone tries to jam us at 35,000 feet. "That someone being you," Colonel Patterson said, joining them on the flight line. "Ghost, I want to be absolutely clear about the risk level here. We're going to deliberately trigger the electronic warfare attack by flying the exact profile that has caused problems for other aircraft. If the countermeasures fail, you could experience complete avionics failure at high altitude." Cassandra had already considered that possibility extensively. Complete avionics failure in an F-22 meant losing all digital flight controls, navigation systems, and communication equipment simultaneously. The aircraft would become essentially unflyable, requiring immediate ejection and the loss of a $200 million fighter. "What's the backup plan if the countermeasures are insufficient?" she asked. "Two chase aircraft will monitor your flight from different altitudes," Patterson explained. "If we detect any signs of electronic interference, they'll provide navigation and communication relay. Additionally, we have emergency recovery procedures in place and a full search and rescue capability on standby." Dr. Webb approached the group carrying a secure tablet with the latest intelligence updates. "We've received confirmation that the hostile satellite network is currently active and targeting our test range. This is as close to combat conditions as we can simulate without actual warfare." The final briefing took place in the aircraft shelter with Cassandra strapped into the ejection seat while technicians completed the system initialization procedures. The F-22's cockpit was both familiar and alien. The basic layout remained the same, but every display, every control system, and every information interface had been upgraded with technology that didn't exist during her original flying days. Primary mission objectives. Patterson read from the test plan. Climb to 35,000 feet, activate all sensor systems, and maintain straight and level flight until electronic interference begins. Once interference is detected, execute countermeasures and evaluate their effectiveness. Secondary objectives, Cassandra asked, running through her own pre-flight checklist. Gather as much intelligence as possible about the interference methods, test the adaptive capabilities of our countermeasures, and return safely with data that will allow us to protect the entire F-22 fleet. The engine start sequence was flawless, the twin Pratt & Whitney turbofans spooling up with the characteristic whine that every fighter pilot recognized. Ground control cleared her for immediate departure, and within minutes, she was airborne over the Nevada desert, climbing rapidly toward the altitude where previous aircraft had experienced electronic warfare attacks. At 25,000 feet, all systems were functioning normally. The new countermeasures package was monitoring electronic emissions, continuously cataloging every signal and preparing to implement defensive protocols automatically when hostile interference was detected. At 30,000 feet, the first anomalous readings appeared on her electronic warfare display. Weak signals were probing the F-22's sensor systems, testing response times, and analyzing defensive capabilities. The countermeasures were detecting the probes, but not yet responding, allowing the hostile systems to reveal their full capabilities. Ghost, we're reading multiple electronic emissions, targeting your aircraft, came the voice of Captain Chun from the lead chase aircraft. Signal strength is increasing rapidly. At 35,000 feet, the attack began in earnest. Cassandra watched her displays as sophisticated jamming signals attempted to overwhelm the F-22's sensor fusion network, exactly as had happened to previous aircraft. But this time, the countermeasures were ready. The adaptive electronic warfare system activated automatically, implementing frequency changes faster than human reflexes could manage. Instead of being overwhelmed by the jamming signals, the F-22's avionics began analyzing the attack patterns and developing real-time countermeasures tailored to each specific interference technique. Countermeasures are active and effective, Cassandra reported over the secure communication channel. All primary systems remain functional. I'm showing full sensor capability and normal flight controls. But even as she spoke, the electronic attack intensified. New signals appeared on different frequencies, probing for weaknesses in the countermeasures. The hostile system was learning from the F-22's defensive responses and adapting its attack methods in real time. Ghost, we're detecting signal patterns that don't match any previous attacks. Dr. Webb's voice came through the secure channel from the ground monitoring station. Whatever you're facing up there is more sophisticated than anything we've seen before. The revelation that the electronic warfare system was adapting to their countermeasures in real time suggested artificial intelligence capabilities that exceeded American estimates of foreign technological advancement. The implications were staggering. If hostile nations possessed AI-driven electronic warfare systems, they could potentially overcome any fixed defensive measures. I'm going to test the limits of their system, Cassandra announced, beginning a series of flight maneuvers designed to stress both her aircraft's electronics and the hostile jamming capabilities. If they're using AI to adapt their attacks, I want to see how quickly they can respond to changing flight profiles. The next several minutes were the most intense electronic warfare engagement ever conducted by an American military aircraft. Cassandra flew a complex pattern of climbs, dives, and high G-turns, while the F-22's countermeasures battled against increasingly sophisticated jamming attempts. Her displays flickered occasionally, as hostile signals temporarily overcame defensive protocols. But the adaptive systems consistently recovered and implemented new countermeasures. This is incredible. Captain Morgan's voice came from the second chase aircraft. The countermeasures are learning from each attack and becoming more effective. It's like watching artificial intelligence battle artificial intelligence. That observation triggered a realization that changed Cassandra's understanding of what they were facing. The electronic warfare attacks weren't just sophisticated. They were being conducted by AI systems that were designed to probe and defeat American defensive capabilities through machine learning algorithms. All aircraft, this is Ghost, she transmitted. I believe we're facing an AI-driven electronic warfare system that's designed to continuously evolve its attack methods. Our countermeasures are working, but only because they're also AI-driven and can adapt faster than the hostile system can learn. The implications of AI versus AI electronic warfare were profound. Traditional military doctrine assumed that electronic warfare involved human operators using sophisticated but ultimately predictable jamming techniques. If both sides were now using artificial intelligence to conduct electronic warfare, the speed and complexity of future conflicts would exceed human comprehension. Sometime into the test flight, something unexpected happened. The electronic attack suddenly ceased, leaving Cassandra's aircraft operating in completely clear electromagnetic conditions. The hostile jamming signal simply disappeared, as if someone had thrown a switch. Ground control, this is Ghost. Electronic interference has stopped completely. All hostile signals have ceased transmission. Copy that, Ghost. We're showing the same thing from ground monitoring stations. The satellite-based jamming network appears to have shut down entirely. Colonel Patterson's voice came through the secure channel with obvious concern. Ghost, we're receiving intelligence that suggests the electronic warfare test was successful beyond our expectations. The hostile AI system has apparently concluded that our countermeasures are too effective to overcome with current capabilities. The revelation that their test flight had essentially won an AI-driven electronic warfare engagement was both satisfying and troubling. If the hostile system had withdrawn because it couldn't defeat American countermeasures, that was a significant victory. But it also meant that adversaries now had detailed intelligence about American electronic warfare capabilities and would undoubtedly begin developing new attack methods. Request permission to return to base. Cassandra transmitted. Mission objectives have been completed successfully. The landing at Nellis was flawless, but the real celebration would have to wait for the complete analysis of the data gathered during the flight. As she taxied to the flight line, Cassandra reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken in just a few days. She had started as an anonymous passenger on a routine commercial flight, trying to rebuild her career after years of civilian life. Now she was back in the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, having just conducted the most sophisticated electronic warfare test in aviation history. The debriefing involved personnel from every agency involved in the investigation. The data gathered during the flight would require weeks of analysis, but preliminary results suggested that American countermeasures were effective against current AI-driven electronic warfare capabilities. Dr. Blackwood was captured at a safe house in Mexico, along with 3 other members of the espionage network. The intelligence gathered from their arrests would lead to the dismantling of one of the most sophisticated foreign intelligence operations ever directed against American military capabilities. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Cassandra found herself standing on the flight line beside the F-22 that had carried her through the most challenging test flight of her career. Colonel Patterson joined her carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking like someone who had just helped prevent a national security catastrophe. "So what's next, Ghost?" he asked. "Back to civilian life, or are you interested in staying involved with the program?" Cassandra considered the question while watching aircraft operations continue around them. The quiet life in Tucson had its appeal, but the past few days had reminded her of the satisfaction that came from solving critical problems and serving something larger than herself. "I think Ghost might be ready to come out of retirement," she said finally. "There's still a lot of work to do on electronic warfare countermeasures, and it looks like the threat is only going to get more sophisticated." "Welcome back to active duty," Patterson said with a smile. "The F-22 program needs experienced test pilots who understand both the technical challenges and the strategic importance of maintaining air superiority." As they walked back toward the operations building, Cassandra realized that her unexpected journey from passenger 12F to active test pilot had come full circle. She was no longer trying to escape her past or find a new identity in civilian life. She was exactly where she belonged, doing the work that only she could do, protecting the technological advantages that kept America and its allies safe. The electronic warfare threat would continue to evolve, requiring constant vigilance and continuous innovation in defensive systems. But for the first time in 15 years, Cassandra Mitchell, call sign Ghost, was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the heart of Cassandra Mitchell's extraordinary journey, from an unassuming passenger in seat 12F, solving crossword puzzles on a routine flight, to being thrust back into the cockpit as Ghost, the legendary test pilot saving America's air superiority, we find a profound life lesson that resonates deeply with all of us. It's the reminder that our past experiences, no matter how buried or forgotten, hold an enduring power that can reignite our purpose at any moment. Cassandra, at 52, had embraced invisibility after years of trauma, unemployment, and the quiet ache of civilian life, believing her days of high-stakes heroism were over. Yet when the F-22 Raptors appeared and her call sign echoed through the intercom, it awakened a dormant fire within her. This story teaches us that life's most valuable skills, resilience, expertise, and the courage to face the unknown never truly fade. They lie in wait, ready to be summoned when the world needs them most. It's an emotional testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal, showing how one woman's quiet strength could avert a national crisis, turning bitterness into triumph and isolation into unbreakable bonds of duty. We all carry our own titanium plates and scars, souvenirs from battles fought and lost. But Cassandra's tale urges us to honor them, not hide them. In a world that often demands we move on and forget, this narrative whispers that our histories are not burdens, but beacons, guiding us back to who we truly are when destiny calls. It's a call to embrace the unexpected detours in our own lives, to recognize that every ordinary day holds the potential for extraordinary impact, and to live with the readiness that turns passengers into pilots, civilians into saviors. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where your past skills unexpectedly saved the day? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this tale touched you. If it inspired you as much as it did us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more gripping stories of unsung heroes. Your support keeps these narratives alive